Leasing primarily helps airlines to cut costs as they build up their fleet. Getting a shoulder to lean on is an integral part of the airline business. Our guest on our interview segment has more.
Pilots are the airlines, the cabin crew is airlines, everything is airlines. It's like a car taken on a hire purchase and you just pay the lease agreement, lease rental every month. So the cost on a dry lease is less, but sometimes what happens when you're going into a complex operation, especially long hauls, airlines do prefer in the beginning to take aircrafts from companies which is more experienced on the market, thereby establishing the market and then going in for the next level. It's not always about the money. It's always about the availability of parts, maintenance, safety, all those factors which comes in when we have a big support of an operations. When the airline starts going from a wet lease to a dry lease, it's the transition which happens, but normally you don't have two different models. Two different models comes in. Let's say you have a big fleet of dry lease aircrafts with you, and suddenly there is a demand of new aircraft sectors coming up. The availability of new aircrafts in the market, you have to wait in a queue, and leasing companies are not there. So what you do to support or augment your operations, you take aircrafts from other leasing companies or other operators on wet lease. They come into your fleet, but is maintained by their crew, so that your operations can then immediately, when you need an immediate boost of your operations, that's the time you do a mix match. The advantage is, for a startup, it's always good when they're not sure of what they, or see, when you take an aircraft, you have to have pilots which is rated for the aircraft. There is training, there's cost which is incurred. You have to have engineers which is trained on the aircraft, there's a cost. There's a maintenance downtime which is a cost. Let's say one engine goes down, and if you do not have a maintenance program or an engine program which is supported, it's a huge cost to the airline. There's a downtime of the aircraft. Let's say today when the aircraft has a problem, it has to go back for a A check, B check, C check, anything. The operator, the leasing company replaces with another aircraft. When you have a dry lease, you do not have that leeway. When you are doing a back-to-back with two aircrafts, it's always good to take a support from someone which can give you an aircraft in lieu of an aircraft, if your thing. When you have a big fleet, then you can do a tail swap. But when you have a small fleet, this is, I think, the best model to go about. See, now everything comes at a premium. If you're going on a wet lease, you are shedding off a lot of liabilities to someone else. So there is a premium. You know, whenever the liability goes up, there's always a premium you pay. So maybe they're paying a bit more extra, but they're safeguarding the operations on a day-to-day. Because when you have passengers booked in and the aircraft has a problem, those passengers are going to be inconvenient. So this is the best way to protect that. Even airlines like Emirates, they take aircrafts on lease. They don't own it because they know end of what do you do with the aircraft after, let's say, 5 years, 7 years, 10 years down the line. Because when you want to get rid of them, you have depreciated the machine to that level then you look for people. So it's always good to have a partner with a leasing company.
The United States may have pulled out of the Iran nuclear deal, but let's see how this action is impacting on airplane manufacturers.
The United States may have withdrawn from the Iran nuclear accord, but it appears to have pulled the shutters down on a $38 billion aircraft deal between Tehran and Western companies, leaving Airbus facing greater risks than app rival Boeing, according to reports. With Donald Trump's announcement on May 8 comes a revocation of export licenses needed by plane makers to sell commercial planes, which require U.S. components to Iran. Tehran has ordered 200 passenger aircraft for state carrier Iran Air worth $38.3 billion at list prices, including 100 from Europe's Airbus 80 from U.S. rival Boeing, and 20 from smaller Franco-Italian turboprop maker. Airbus is more exposed to wide-body jets, for which sluggish global demand forced it last month to revise down part of its production plans. Iran has ordered 53 wide-body jets from Airbus and 30 from Boeing, which are yet to be built. Losing the order deals a further blow to Airbus's newest wide-body jets, the A330neo, which faces weak demand months before it enters service.
He's made it very clear, and it's happened before, that any countries that ignore some of the sanctions that the US has imposed, but also operating partly in the US and so on, are going to be affected by anything that perhaps circumvents or tries to circumvent the sanctions that the US has imposed. It's bad news for a number of firms, for example, aircraft manufacturers, the deals they have with Iran, oil companies, of course, quite involved in all this. And then, of course, of the other exports that actually right now, particularly from the EU, go to Iran. And there will be impacts on the oil price too. For the moment, it hasn't been that pronounced, but I think the market is waiting to see how things evolve in the next few days.
Airbus and Boeing said they will study the US decision, but declined to comment on the risks they faced. Neither plane maker will be as concerned about the potential loss of a total of around 100 narrow-body plane orders from the Iranian deals, as demand for those jets is strong and they will have no problem in allocating production slots for other buyers.
There are two issues. First of all, whether any of the orders that Iran has already made for Boeing aircraft will be affected, and probably yes. And the second thing is what happens with Airbus orders that have been made, because of course some of the parts may be coming from the US, or anything that has any US content and any dealings with the US that then gets re-exported to Iran is going to come under scrutiny, and I think that will need to be looked at very, very carefully. Some of those details will need to be sorted out, and I'm sure that EU officials will be working on this right now. But yes, I think we might actually see lots of business disruption taking place. Well, the oil situation is going to be a very significant one. I mean, what the markets have already found is that, yes, there's going to be some tension. Prices had risen a little bit before the announcement, which was expected. They've come down a little bit since. The implications for Iran oil are right now rather uncertain. But of course, there are companies operating there. Already we've been hearing about concerns about Total's operations and others, which have been reported in the papers. And I'm sure this is going to be a big issue which the Europeans and others will want to resolve very quickly.
Boeing is ahead with 221 net orders for 2018 and had delayed booking the orders from its $16.5 billion Iran contract. That's Iran's biggest with America since the 1979 revolution. Although Airbus and Boeing are arch foes in the $120 billion annual jet market, their deals with Iran had brought them into alignment because each depended on the same US licenses.
When we return after the break, Newsflash comes on. Do join us again.